Lonesome Lands podcast. This is the Lonesome Report. I have a slight cold, which is why I sound so silky smooth. Um, I'm Jim Mundorf in Southwest Iowa. Shad Sullivan,
I'm at the headwaters of Bitter Creek in Archer County, North Texas.
and apparently we're just always going to be a little late with this. So I think my hopeful schedule is we'll do this, have this put out on Thursday, probably in the evening. Podcast like the audio version earlier, and I'm hoping to do like podcasts with guests on Tuesdays. Maybe not every Tuesday, but Shad may not be here. Honeymoon's over. Honeymoon's over, Shad. Is that the headline?
I guess it is today.
What do you think?
I think
Trump's first, or Trump, last week, Shad was ready to throw his underwear on stage at the State of the Union.
I was. I still love it. I still think it was the greatest presidential speech in history. I thought it was awesome. I still love it.
And this week, stock markets crashed.
It's a whole different story.
He's attacking the most constitutionally conservative congressman that we have, the guy that we wanted to be Secretary of Agriculture,
Yep.
Thomas Massie. He wants him primaried and kicked his butt out of Congress. Which
Yeah.
the craziest thing about that deal is Thomas Massie was the only one. Trump did this whole thing before. He wanted him kicked out before. After COVID, the CARES Act. The CARES Act, and that's the other thing. When Donald Trump was running for president, when he first came out, I wasn't supportive at all because I remembered all the stuff that went on during COVID. And if you're going to talk about inflation, where it all really started was the CARES Act, and there was one guy who stood up against it, and that was Thomas Massie. And so if you look back on that, and Trump tried to run him out of town for it. So if you look back on that, it's like, oh, he was right. And now we're having the exact same thing happen again. Maybe you should think about he's right.
I love Thomas Massie.
Yeah. And if you're not familiar with what's happening, they're trying to pass Joe Biden's spending bill. They're continuing the spending from the Joe Biden administration, and Trump's supportive of it. And it's the continuing resolution to get us into, I think, September, so the government doesn't shut down. But that's the thing. They come through and they find all this waste and fraud and all this abuse, and then they're like, okay, now we have to fund it.
Yeah, but because
Like all
of that
those.
waste,
Go ahead.
because of that waste and fraud, and we're finding it. I mean, we've already saved like $190 billion, and so just from an outside perspective, you have that balance, right? Where they've got major pressure from the global corporations, the farmers across the country. All of these organizations are putting lobbying power into it to help to force them to, go ahead with the CR. And so I'm assuming their mentality is like, well, we're saving the American people $190 billion. We can go ahead and go forward with the CR. That's kind of how I figure it's happening.
I think the one, complaint a lot of people have on Trump is he loves spending money.
Well,
I
as a
mean,
business
it's great that
person,
he's what?
I know, and I know what you're saying. But as a business person, you cannot. You have to spend money. To make money, we have to spend money, and we're going to have to spend money to kind of fix this around. I'm not saying I totally agree 100% with everything they're doing, but I do agree with that Doge, and I do agree with all of that corruption ending. But I do wish Trump would lay off with Thomas Massie too.
Yeah. And I mean, that's just kind of his thing too. He spouts off with I guess it's not a tweet because it's on his thing that nobody follows. So they take a screenshot of the Truth Social and then they put it on Twitter so people actually see it. But yeah, I mean, he just went off on Thomas Massie and said they should run him out of town. Where it's like, and then somebody made a great point. Like, what if Trump actually put his weight behind Massie and tried to get a spending bill that doesn't add to the deficit? Imagine what would happen then. Like, I don't know. It's just stupid. But and then there's a ton of people mad about where's the Epstein files and where's the JFK
And
files?
now everybody
Where's
today's like, "Where's Pam Bondi at?" I mean, everybody's talking about it today
Where's
on.
she at?
I
What
don't
do you
know.
mean?
I don't know.
Because she said this Epstein stuff. Everybody, I feel like with her, everyone, she's the one who said they're going to have these Epstein files, and then they're not out.
Yeah, they're not out there. That's right.
Yeah, and then we got the Brooke Rollins update. What's the Brooke Rollins update? I was going to talk about USDA. I guess they
Well,
cut.
what is the Brooke Rollins update? I just see Brooke Rollins where everybody else sees her running
Yeah,
around representing agriculture, I
she's all
guess.
over. But
She's everywhere.
have you seen anyone ask her about the USDA cut these food programs, local food programs? That's got a lot of people mad. But I did see. So if you're not familiar, I think it was during COVID they came out and put a bunch of money into go out to the states so that they could buy food locally for school programs.
That
So
was that under the coronavirus food protection program?
I'm not sure,
I don't know.
but I'm just saying. And so USDA apparently has cut those programs, which those programs are great. And it's like if we're going to spend money, why not spend money on like we all talk about food security and all that? We need to build these local food programs and local beef packers and make everything more localized and not centralized and concentrated. Um, and so now they cut that. And the excuse they have is, well, we have to cut, that was a COVID era program that just got cut and it just so happened to contain those local food programs.
That my gut feeling tells me that those will be back online
All right. Well,
because those are good. Those are really good programs. I mean, and the majority of rural America is going to local food programs for resources.
yeah.
I know my these two little communities that I live in and try to represent. They are. I think it's a great deal.
Hmm.
But back to where Brooke Rollins is, I don't know. She's all over, and I have no idea. I noticed just this morning a federal judge is requiring Trump to rehire everybody that he's fired under at the DOJ, at the VA, at the USDA, and so I guess we're in turmoil. I guess that's what you can call it,
Yeah.
Jim.
We're in turmoil. Although, according to your gut, local food programs, don't worry about it.
I think those are just common sense programs, and
Yeah.
I think that they'll be back and be fine. I mean, they've got the money already. When he says they're cutting money, I mean they're not cutting the funding right now, are they? No, they've already got that funding.
Somebody put on, well, my dad called me and said there was a Facebook post he saw. So, and I saw it. I looked it up and it was some farm guy who was flying to the Commodity Classic and he just happened to sit in coach. This is according to his Facebook post. He was sitting in coach next to a gal who was flying the Commodity Classic and she said, I'm Brooke Rollins. And so and he had this whole thing about how she was trying to put on a good look for Doge and the administration and all that. Because he asked her, he's like, "Why don't you have your own plane, or why aren't you flying private or something?" She said, "Well, this is what Trump administration's doing. It's going around Facebook." That's what I thought too. Like you don't have a single assistant or staff person sitting with you. You
Well,
just
when
happen to
you're
plop
yeah,
down
when you're
in
in Maine,
coach.
then Kansas, and then Central Texas all in one
Right.
day,
Well,
and
well, he said her thing was, well, I live close to the Dallas Fort Worth airport, and I could just come down here, hop on an airplane.
okay.
Yeah,
All right.
seems a little odd, but it's going around Facebook.
Okay.
What about the tariffs? Big news
Well,
on the tariffs.
that's big news, right? Bill Bullard with RCAF USA was on Fox Business News last night. I thought he did a fantastic job. He had a great op-ed talking about tariffs and how they're needed to reduce America's massive global food deficit. I think one thing people don't understand is that the deficit is $29 billion, or is it million? There's just a lot on that tariff deal, and of course, you can talk about tariffs, and I'm all for tariffs, but then you get into the weeds on reciprocal tariffs, and now the European or yeah, the United Kingdom, maybe the European Union, one of those countries today, going to 200% tariff us. And it's really truly a trade war. Sounds like to me, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
So
But I mean, from the ag people who are anti-tariff and they just want to continue the status quo.
yeah,
That's what we talked
that,
about before. But in that Bill Bullard piece, he said, consider that since 1980, the U.S. population has grown by roughly 115 million people. In the same time, our nation has lost more than 650,000 beef cow farms, over
right.
half of all beef beef cow farms. The U.S. has also lost 78% of its feedlots and 54% of its federally inspected food plants. The big four meat packers now control 85% of the fed cattle industry.
Yeah, and that's just the
Right
cattle.
on.
That's just the cattle part. I mean, we're importing 74% of our lamb now. It is unbelievable. See, here we go back to what I say. Well, you just said it, status quo, right?
Hmm.
I
Like
mean, if you
if
don't want,
Right. So if you want to continue as we have continued, that's what you want to continue,
that's
right?
right.
Just removing farm, especially in the livestock sector, removing small operations and continuing to concentrate everything into these major corporations. Um, and
That's
so the
exactly
goal is to
right.
not do that. And that was a great way to put it. Something's got to change if you want things to change. So,
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Something's got to change if you want things to change. But I've noticed that in all of these hearings they've had on Capitol Hill, ag hearings, the people, and I listened to one this morning. Uh, Testimony was given by a gentleman out of Montana with the Farmers Union, and he said he had some really valid, really great points. Cool, but they do a lot of trading right there on the border, Montana. Cattle trading, and he kind of wanted to play both sides. I mean, I liked a lot what he said, but there was some of the things like pushing these billions of dollars out for uh, a saving grace for these farmers and ranchers.
yeah, that's how
I
I took it. He
uh,
he was very, he's kind of on the right side of things, but he also kind of had his hand out. Like,
yeah,
how we
no,
fix this is you just send us money.
exactly.
That was kind of
And
what
I
I got
guess
out of his deal.
one of my questions is he was talking about these farmers and ranchers can't go get loans without these government guarantees, and I'm like, when did it become like mandatory that we got an operating loan for our ag operation that had a government guarantee? I don't have a government guarantee on mine. And I guess it just became part of our culture. Maybe I don't know, Jim. But he was like, "Well, nobody's going to loan these guys any money without a government guarantee." And I'm like, "When did
Yeah,
that become a thing?"
right.
So
But I
I
mean, that's what's stinks about these guys that go in front of the senators. They say that kind of stuff, like and then they're the ones speaking to the Senate.
well, I got to say that he was the
Yeah, the best out of the crew.
of all of them that I've listened to, he was the only one that kind of had some independence character to him, and was not totally supported by a, a trade organization, that has alternative motives
Yeah,
instead of
well, h-
independent agriculture.
how does the Montana Farmers Union get there? When you've got your national, NCBA guy, you've got your national sheep guy, and then national turkey, I think,
Why
and
don't we have?
national
Why don't they just
egg.
have like Jim Mundorf, American Rancher, or one of these guys that just they pick off the street and said that's a real true producer that doesn't have any ties or
Shad
loyalty.
Sullivan,
I do
I
not
think
want
is
to do
what
it.
you're saying.
I
Well,
wouldn't
we
do it.
have to have someone that,
There's a lot of people smarter than me, but we need those kind of people to because it brings a real reality check to Congress. You know, so
Mhm.
that's how I kind of feel about it.
Yeah. So speaking of the testimony,
Yes, sir.
National Cattlemen's Beef Association, which one are we, Shad? Are we animal rights industrial. Oh, yeah, that was the other guy who called us the animal rights industrial complex. The other guy said we're either animal rights radicals or we're bought off fake farm groups.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Anyone who criticizes the beef checkoff is either an animal rights extremist or the animal rights extremists have bought off the fake farm groups and got them to criticize the beef checkoff.
yeah. Well, I got news for him. I've been called a lot worse. So, uh, you know, I don't know. I derive 100% of my income from the beef industry, so uh, I I don't know what I am. I'm just a cattle rancher. Not a very smart one either.
Well, how about we're just people who are sticking up for the actual, I mean, to go back to Bill Bullard, um, and that quote, he said, anyone who criticizes the beef checkoff, you're either an animal rights extremist or you're a
Yeah,
fake farm group.
yeah,
Bill Bullard, consider that 1980, the U.S. population has grown by roughly 115 million people. Now, in 1980, this is a sidebar. In 1985 is when the beef checkoff started.
correct.
In the same time frame, our nation has lost more than 650,000 beef cow farms, over half of its beef cow farms. The U.S. has also lost 78% of its feedlots and 54% of its federally inspected food plants. The big four meat packers now control 85% of the cattle industry, of the fed cattle industry. And so and according to the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, who is partnered with those four meat packers, if you criticize their program that does nothing but promote beef and has never promoted cattle, even though it says in the first line of the Beef Act that it is supposed to promote beef and cattle markets. If you criticize that program at all, which has led to those numbers, then you're an animal rights extremist.
Yeah.
And that goes into everything we've talked about, and some stuff we're gonna keep talking about too. Um,
The fascists do the same thing. Marxist, fascist, anyism, they all do the same thing. They accuse you of those things.
right. Yeah, I mean, it's just how they try to intimidate kind of and push their message out there, which it's just ridiculous, and it's got a lot of people. Hopefully, it's opening people's eyes. I like it. I love it when they show who they are. And that clip right there showed who they are. If you
Oh,
disagree
yeah.
with us, you're the worst. You're an animal rights extremist. It don't matter if how many cattle you have on your place, Shad. You're an animal rights extremist because you
Mm-hmm.
disagree with the big organization.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I guess, and to go along that, Livestock Marketing Association
They
had
had a
their
fight.
fly in, and it just goes along with who are these groups that get to D.C. and get the ear of the congressmen and the senators.
You
We
know,
talked.
you know
Go
how
ahead.
they do that? They have a lobbyist in DC. They have somebody in DC among the people all the time. And that's why it takes so much money to run their organizations. And I'm
Yeah,
not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying my dream is to end all this lobbying. That is my
yeah.
dream.
Well, to go back to Thomas Massie, he has a sign on his door: "No foreign lobbyists allowed." Which that just goes to foreign countries, but he has a
Really?
sign on his door: "No foreign lobbyists allowed inside this office." Um, but does LMA have a lobbyist, full-time lobbyist in DC?
I don't know. I'm sure they have a lobbyist on staff. They about have to, don't they?
I don't know. I don't know
No,
how
but
they
I,
can
I
afford it
don't
with that.
know. I'm just saying I don't know. But if they have somebody in communication out there to have a fly in, right? Somebody's doing it.
And that's the other thing. Like I, we like your local sale barn. I think it's the ultimate competitive market. So when we're talking, if we say anything critical of LMA, I think cattle should be sold at auction at your
Yeah,
local sale barn. It's the most competitive market, best way of selling cattle out there.
it is true price discovery.
Exactly. But where the problem lies is going back to those same numbers that we went through about cattle producers. And when you're an organization and you have the ear of the senators and you put on I saw on Facebook they put up that they're They're against mandatory EID that's not funded, which means they're not against mandatory electronic identification, forcing all the cattle ranchers to and forcing all the sale barns to put these EID tags in all the cattle. They're against the government not funding it. They want the
Well,
taxpayers to fund all the EID tags. That's all they want. That's all they care about.
that's exactly what the guy from Farmers Union in Montana said this morning. He said it's a national security issue. It's an animal health issue, but it has to be funded by the federal government or by the people because it's for the good of the people, is what he said.
Yeah. And I mean, it goes back to, well, I mean, how you getting in DC? Well, we know NCBA has a full house there. Maybe if you
Yeah,
agree with NCBA and then their lobbyists work for you and they get you up there and get the USDA people to, I mean, and it was almost like they had these USDA people come and talking to them and telling them, how we have to have these traceability programs and all this stuff. Um, but to go back to even like the egg deal, what we got going on with the egg thing. The That's an industry that has been so concentrated that when one bird gets a disease in one barn, you're wiping out thousands and thousands of animals. So if you're really worried about, you're constantly traceability, 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 but you want to continue to concentrate the industry, right? We've got a brand new feedlot that everybody's praising, 150,000 head in 1 square mile, all on concrete. Isn't it wonderful? No, it's not. I would rather see, 1,000, hundreds of other feedlots with 200 head
exactly.
in dirt lots. Sorry,
The way it's
I mean,
supposed
I
to
don't,
be.
right. Like instead of concentrating everything to where if a disease comes in, it could wipe out 100,000 head at once, or you'd have to euthanize, or however they would have to do it. They're so worried about traceability, they're just not. And that goes back to what's the real motive of
Yeah,
EID? Like,
yeah,
are you really worried about disease coming in, or do you want every rancher to have something on their ranch that you can tell them what kind of information they have to have, and eventually
yeah,
you can tell them what they have to do with those animals?
exactly. And there's not ultimately the goal of the EID is it's all about data collection, right? And so the ultimate goal, and I'll say it again, it's all about the land because it doesn't matter what kind of productive input you're talking about, they want to control it. They want to have the authority to tell you yay or nay. I mean the fruit is all over the world, right? We're just fighting it here in the United States. Independent cattle producers are fighting it because it is a property rights issue. And yeah, I have no, my thought is are we going to become so concentrated that we're all serfs and we're still paying for the EID mandate, the traceability mandates, but then they own everything from birth to plate, just like, they want to do. It says it at the USDA, right?
Hmm. Well, the
So,
past NCBA president said we want everything from birth to plate, EID,
yeah,
what to wear a EID tag. And that just goes back to, who's controlling who here.
that's right.
USDA that came from USDA, and now NCBA pushes it out to their members. Um, and now it seems like LMA, which is Livestock Marketing Association, which to go back, they're an insurance, they sell insurance. And
So does Farm Bureau.
right, it's Farm Bureau. So how come the people in DC that get the ear of the congressmen and the senators are insurance salespeople and lobbyists? I mean, that's where we are in agriculture. And what has that gotten us? What do you
It's
say?
got 700,000.
650,000
Yeah,
less cattle
less
farms. Go
producers,
go
less
right back to
consumption.
that. All those numbers.
Yep, less consumption, less people on the land, less people coming back to the ranch. More, I've been watching real close all of these new employees out there in Washington D.C. and they all come from trade organizations. Every bit of them.
Hmm.
It's something to behold.
Yep. Yes, sir. Um, what else you got?
Well, there's a lot of things going on. Um, you know, I got a little information. Somebody sent me something out of Utah about this land taking from the
Brady
19.
Blackett.
Yeah, Brady Blackett. So in Utah, in southern Utah, I remember in the 1990s when the desert tortoise was the big deal, right?
Hmm.
That was the big deal environmentally speaking. We had to get the people and the cattle off the land because of the desert tortoise.
I remember
But
Rush
this,
Limbaugh. Rush
yeah,
Limbaugh talking about desert tortoise.
yeah. Well, there was a lady out there, and I can't think of her name right now, but um, she her family had 1,000 acres that fell under this what they call this desert wildlife management area, and they ended up losing this land because of the desert tortoise because they put the endangered or the desert tortoise as an endangered species. So they lost this land, and they worked like everybody else does. They worked hard to try to keep it. Well, here we are. What are we? 90, 2000, 20, 25, 35 years later, and that same exact piece of land has been sold for development, and that little community is really uh, throwing the flames on it because they don't like, and it's a two-edged sword. It's a forked tongue deal where they took the land from the people, and now they're 35 years later they're going to develop it with 1,400 homes, a shopping center. I looked at the land on the internet, and I'm like, where are they going to get the water, right? Some of the townsfolk who are against it said, we don't even have sidewalks in our town yet. The development authority or the city authority uh, passed it, and they are already out there bulldozing and getting ready for this new, great, big, huge new subdivision. So those are kind of the things that prove what we've been saying has been the way it is all of these years. It's all fork tongued, right? It's all
Yeah.
about they say one thing and do another, and that was a bad, bad deal for a family to lose that kind of land. And 1,000 acres in southern Utah isn't that much. It might run 10 cows, maybe. I don't know,
Yeah.
but
But
it's still
I
the
mean, the point
principle.
of it is you couldn't have a cow, which is stupid anyway. What's a cow gonna do to a turtle?
They said they would step on their eggs, as I remember.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can't have a handful of cows out on there. But now, and now they're bulldozing the place. Did you? I didn't even. So I read the article. It didn't even say what happened to the turtle. What about our poor little turtle? Is he
Well,
thriving now or
they're
what?
thriving. Apparently, they had a picture of them on the news. I watched a little news clipping of it, and the desert tortoise is huge. I mean, huge.
Oh,
And
they're that big.
oh yeah, they're monsters. I don't think that they were going to compete with the cattle very much. I doubt that they eat the same things, but whatever. It's not a good deal.
Hmm. You ever have any endangered species on?
Oh, they tried in Colorado. We had the Preble's jumping mouse back in the 90s and
Hmm.
2000s. Of course, the big one now is the prairie chicken, right?
Is
And
that the same as sage grouse? Is that?
yeah, that's what we call them. It's the prairie sage grouse, right? And I've been in there my whole life. My mom's been there the whole life. My grandfather, we've never seen one, but
A
we were
sage grouse?
visited. Yeah, we've never seen one. They're really more populated in southwest Kansas, extreme southeast Colorado, and maybe the northern panhandle of Texas and Oklahoma. But they had us all in that area, right? And
I
so,
thought I had heard you could shoot. I think there's hunting. You can hunt sage grouse in some states.
well, I know when I was in Nebraska managing a ranch for my dad, we had them everywhere up there. You'd be riding along, and them suckers would go to flopping and scare your horse to death and scare you worse,
Good horse
and
training.
yeah. But yeah, no, they've come under protective, and then there was something else that I can't remember. They just try to do everything. Of course, the wolf.
That's it. Yeah, I mean, that's like the other thing. And I
Oh,
think it was Wyoming where you can shoot a sage grouse, but it's like, yeah. And the wolf is so endangered everywhere. And then in Wyoming, you can just go up and shoot them.
also at one time they put the black-tailed prairie dog on
A prairie dog.
the black-tailed prairie dog was going to
Did
be
you have a
listed.
lot of them in
Oh
Colorado?
my gosh, billions and billions and billions of them. Yeah,
Hmm.
they're not on the list now.
All right. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots to talk about.
Let's hear it.
Colorado has a bill. It's called the Misbranding Cultivated Meat Product Bill. It's House Bill 25-1203. It prohibits food processing plants from selling and or offering for sell cultivated meat that is misbranded as a meat product. And it is currently under consideration. Ty
So what?
Winter,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I talked to somebody about that deal and they said at first, you know, they've looked into it a lot and they said at first they thought it was more of a, just trying to separate the with these fake meat bans. They just want it more of a separation between real meat and fake meat. But as they've looked into the approval process of this lab grown meat,
Okay.
they have become very concerned about like the actual health risks and how that was approved and and the whole way that went down.
Well,
Because it's
I know
got so much money behind it.
I know in Colorado that this bill started out as a total ban on selling cultured meat, and then it moved over to a labeling bill. That's really what it
Okay.
is a
Yeah.
labeling bill. But there are several of these bills across the nation being presented to these state legislators, and I'll tell you, to be honest, these trade organizations that are supposed to be pro agriculture are fighting against these good bills.
Right.
So here we
Including
go.
there are state cattlemen's organizations
Yep.
and Farm Bureau
Yep.
that are pushing back on them.
Yep.
But to go back to NCBA calling us animal rights activists, I don't remember when Tyson Foods or Cargill invested in the PETA Company of the Year, which was Beyond Meat. I don't remember NCBA having a problem with that. If
I
you're going to
went.
talk about animal rights activists, they are the biggest proponent of fake meat. And now our beef packers that control 85% of the beef industry in the US are also in the fake meat business and have put a ton of money in it and invested in it. Um, and I don't hear NCBA saying a whole lot about that.
Well, they
They
can't.
ever have.
I mean, it's the same. It's the exact same model as when the Beef Checkoff partnered up with the World Wildlife Fund, and the World Wildlife Fund was on record just before their partnership began, saying cattle are killing the planet. It's the same exact thing.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
they're not going to say nothing about it.
right. But I mean, if you're really worried about animal rights extremists, maybe say something when your partners invest in them,
The
right?
power of the dollar, bro. The
Right.
power of the dollar.
Yeah. Speaking of Colorado
Okay,
bills, they're trying to ban guns.
they sure are. I got that right here in front of me. It's a gun ban legislation. And guess who's going to have to be the policeman on it? The Colorado Parks and Wildlife, of all the people, not the sheriffs, which is the sheriff is really the police on it now. They're taking that away. The amendment will require individuals who wish to own semi-automatic weapons to submit an application to Colorado Parks and Wildlife to include their full name, date of birth, and declaration that they are legally allowed to own a gun and will not violate any state and federal laws related to the purchase or possession of the firearms. But now, listen, I will tell you this, and I have not studied this deeply, but the sheriffs of Colorado are coming against this wholly, but it is moving. And it's called Senate Bill 003, and it was sponsored by all Democrats, of course. It passed through the Senate on a 1915 vote. All Republicans voted against it. In the Senate, there were only three Democrats that voted against it. A guy by the name of Tom Sullivan from Centennial, Colorado. Guess where Centennial? Who else is in Centennial? NCBA. That's their headquarters, Centennial, Colorado. So he's their representative, but he's the one
Is
that
he a family member?
no relation. I don't think.
I
I
thought
hope
that's what you
not.
were about to say. My Uncle Tom.
No, I don't have all of my people with the last name of Sullivan are dead. I don't know any of them.
Mm.
But that's a big deal, and I mean, they had hearings on it. the day before yesterday, I think a lot of people got up there to the Capitol to testify against the bill. But listen, we're outnumbered in Colorado legislature. Rural Colorado is outnumbered, and it's not a good thing. So I don't know where that's going to go. That could cause a war. I think it's very stringent, and you need to really study on that if you're a gun enthusiast, which I am not a gun enthusiast, but I believe in the Second Amendment wholly and strongly. So
Yeah.
okay, here's something that's big in the news that we need to talk about a little bit. Um, Canada has a new premier, right? A new prime minister, and his name is Mark Carney. Have you ever heard of him? No.
Mm-mm.
Well, the Canadian people thought they were going to get somebody better, but they basically appointed this guy. The way I understood it is he only received like 150,000 votes. It was a wild. The video I watched on it was wild. But this guy, he's a globalist, and he is the former governor of the Bank of England. Okay, he's a member of the World Economic Forum, and he was the financial advisor to COP26, the climate change summit,
Mm-hmm.
and member of the Bilderberg Society. It just could not get worse. And so I went down the rabbit hole, and I was like, well, who in America are members of the Bilderberg Society? Because if you get into conspiracy theories, they say, well, the Bilderberg Society on the left, people are saying it's a capitalistic form of top-down government. The people on the right are saying no, they want the New World Order, which is true. That's what it's all about.
What is the Bilderberg? What is
Well, it's a group of self-selected stakeholders that get together to talk about global capitalism. Now, if that makes sense, I don't know what does. Global capitalism, but they are just a self-selected group that is planning the economic outcome of the world. And David Rockefeller, who is one of our global elites, was one of our global elites. He's the one that actually said, people accuse my family and I of being internationalists and conspiring to build a global economic power through a one world order. If that's the charge, I stand convicted. And so he was a part of it. Bezos is a part of the Bilderberg Society. Gates, Peter Thiel is a part of it. Here's one that blew my mind. Stacey Abrams, the former Georgia House of Representative that just got accused of funneling $20 billion to the EPA through the EPA. She is a member of the Bilderberg Society. And I'm like, this thing could not get any more corrupt. So that's kind of an overall example of what's going on globally. But that, I think we have to watch Mark Carney. He's a bad.
Here's the other thing. Go back to honeymoon being over. How many people voted for Trump think that we should annex Canada or whatever? He keeps bringing this up.
Is that real?
I don't know. But here's the thing. We're going to bring in another state that elects these people. You know what I mean? I don't want to bring anybody in that voted for Justin Trudeau or whoever this new guy is.
And Trudeau was.
I love we have Canadian people that listen, I know, and I think they're great. And the other thing on country of origin labeling, which we haven't talked a lot, we should talk about that next time. But if something came in and said from Canada, I would have no problem eating that. I don't think Canadians should be that worried about country of origin labeling. I mean, of course, we would want to eat U.S. beef, but it's not like, I don't know. What do you think?
Canadians have country of origin labeling.
Yeah, that's the other thing. And they have, what was that ad? Was that like a checkoff kind of ad? There was an ad out that had a maple leaf and it said, only buy beef with the maple leaf on it.
With the leaf.
Right?
Beef with the leaf. Yeah.
So you can't get mad at us for wanting country of origin labeling
I'm like,
when you have country of origin.
With the leaf. You go buy the beef with the leaf.
Right. Canadians should buy their own beef, and
Dang
Americans
right.
should buy their own beef.
Right.
Exactly. Great point. But good to go back to, how about we just leave the Canadian people up there instead of bringing another gigantic blue state?
I agree, but I did see a video on this farmer up there, this rancher up there. I've seen it twice now, and I didn't listen to the whole thing, but he's like, "We want to be part of the
I
United
know.
States. Let us come." But then I did read something maybe yesterday or the day before, Jim, about like the people of Greenland really want to become a state. And then you have, I have this sister that studies prophecy, and she's like, "Shad, there's something to all this." And I'm like, "Oh, I don't want to hear it right now." Don't get me
It's
confused.
in the Bible.
But
There's,
I'll tell you,
yeah.
no, but she explained it to me, and it's all kind of, after she explains some of these things to me, they kind of make sense. But I'm like, okay, I'm down too many rabbit holes and roads anyway, so I don't want to, don't confuse me. But
That's what I
I
think
can see where
anytime.
those
Go ahead.
I can see where those farmers and ranchers in Canada, because they're all conservative. They're just like us. They're
Oh, I
good
know it.
conservative people. They want out from under the tyranny. My God, they can't even own a gun, or I don't even think they can own a gun now. I think
Yeah,
Trudeau
that's the
took,
thing. We don't
you
want,
know,
they have this government that somebody up there voted for that took away their
yeah,
guns and has all this. Remember the truckers strike, and
yeah,
then they froze their
got in
bank
their
accounts,
accounts. Yep.
all that stuff. Like, it's like Trump's like, hey, let's bring in these communists. Let's bring them down to America.
I thought he
How
was
about let's
joking.
not? Let's leave them up there. But I
I
do feel
know.
for the people that are I mean, it's kind of like Californian ranchers, like they're just kind of stuck under the thumb of these horrible governments. And
Colorado ranchers,
oh yeah, I
New
saw
Mexico ranchers, you know,
exactly. Yeah, I
good
saw
people.
that. Yeah, I mean, can you explain how come it seems like, I mean, you guys didn't get just a liberal governor. You got the biggest idiot liberal governor married to a man who's who's like a PETA member, animal rights
He's a
activist.
true extremist.
Right.
He's,
Like you
he's a true,
got the
yeah.
work. It's kind of like you don't just get, and they're so stupid. Like they're just like, who's voting for these people? Like
Our
when you
attorney
hear them talk and
general,
stuff, it's just like they just seem it, and you see how corrupt. It's like Gavin Newsom. Like, how do you see
dude.
Gavin Newsom and the stuff he's pulled where I mean, I feel like their memory is failing them when they took the basketball hoops off the baskets and they filled the skate parks full of sand, and then he's out with his friends partying. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
care if you're a Democrat or Republican or who you are. You got to get rid of hypocrites like that. But then they wanted to run him for president. You know what I mean? It's like, what?
Well, I'll tell you this: Jared Polis will run for president one day, and he'll have a lot of support in Colorado. But listen, it's not just the president or the governor; it's the attorney general, it's the secretary of state. All of them are corrupt leftist ideologues. They are bad, bad, bad communist people, and I'm telling you, they want us to go down that route. I mean, I could actually see where there's in New Mexico and Colorado under these gun deals that there could be some dangerous things happen because of the defiance of the American people. I don't know how that's all going to shake out, but I mean, why wouldn't it be a mess when you have? I guess I better shut up. I don't know how to say all this, but I mean, we have people that don't know who they are in our state legislatures. Why wouldn't we have a mess? If you don't even know who you are as a person, how do you know where you stand on politics and ideology and the confusion? See, Satan is the author of confusion, and I'm not going to get off on that, but that's really where we're at. Everybody's confused, and that's why I say we got to come back to the basics of the Constitution, the fundamentals of the Constitution.
Yeah.
And you know what'd be really great is if our consumers, if we could bridge that gap between us and the consumers to help them understand that being three generations away from their food source, it kind of makes them take it for granted. They don't know where they've come from or who they really are. it's very important to know where your food comes from because that is the heart of the human being, right? And so I won't get off on that, but that's how I kind of feel about that. We've got to, we've got to bridge some gaps here. Lonesome history.
Lonesome History segment brought to you by Mundorf Heritage Beef. If you want to find out where your food comes from, if you want to know where your beef comes from, you can buy it directly from MundorfHeritageBeef.com and a historic Southwest Iowa family. How about that?
That's pretty cool, actually.
Okay, and we're always learning on here, which was what I was gonna say. Um, we're always trying to do better, I guess. And after that last history segment, I went through that and thought it worked really good. But I felt like there was probably 4 or 5 history segments within what we got into with the Johnson County War.
Okay.
And so I feel like we should get back to like how that started because I feel like I went through it kind of quick and there's a lot of left out parts. So maybe just part 2 of the Johnson County War, the prequel, how it started. But we talked about what I thought was real interesting is how, we talked about how these British European aristocrats came around it became this cool thing to buy cattle ranches out west.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I found my other history book. I bet you recognize this one.
I do. I do. I got it.
Yeah. So when I was a kid, um, we, it was always a commercial on television. If you're a youngster watching or listening, I just showed the Time Life. What are they called? Time Life collection.
Maggie? Yeah.
Yeah, Old West collection or whatever. And how many books was
Yeah.
it? I only have a couple. It was like 10
I
books or
have 12.
something. 12 books.
I have 12 of them.
Yeah. And
Yep.
and they were always on TV like you can own this history book and as a kid I loved it, but we couldn't afford, the whole collection. So my mom would get them at the library. We'd go to the library and get them and I would get them come home and just study, the cowboy one I would study.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. But there was a book wrote by in 1885 wrote by Walter, German immigrant named Walter Baron von Richthofen, a true
Yeesh.
sp- a true spiritual descendant of Baron Munchausen and an uncle of the Red Baron of World War One that Snoopy fought.
Okay.
Um, but he said in 1885 he wrote an influential book, Cattle Raising on the Plains of North America, in which he blithely argued that there is not the slightest element of uncertainty to cattle raising. What are you doing?
I'm looking. I thought I had that book.
Oh. Um, he said Richthofen's basic contention, studied with examples of vast profits, was that in 10 years, 100 cows could become a herd of 2,856 cattle, provided that 4 out of 5 cows gave birth each year. How's that math come out? Um,
I'm trying to do it in my mind.
yeah, I know. It sounds pretty good. But then there was another book called called The Beef Bonanza or How to Get Rich on the Plains. When James S. Brisbane presented figures to show that 250,000 borrowed at 10% invested in cattle would yield $110,000 clear in 5 years. And that was back in the 1880s. You could make you if you invested 250,000, you'd have 810,000 in 5 years. And so then all of these people from Europe, it was heavy Scots, a ton of Eastern investors, like, I mean, big names. Well, like Teddy Roosevelt, you've all heard of, but then like the, what was the guy's name? Medora? I can't remember. He was right up there with Teddy Roosevelt, but then it said, Russell B. Harrison, son of President Benjamin Harrison, Augustus Bush, the St. Louis Brewer, Nelson Morris, the Chicago Packer of the Morris and what was it? Cudahy. Um, just all these Eastern. like big time, big money, big family people bought ranches out west. But then also it said it was heavy Scots and Englishmen and other Europeans, and they came and bought a bunch of ranches too. And so then they started the Cheyenne Club. And that is also where I first, in the Time Life book, is where I first saw the Cheyenne Club. I'm showing it to you, Chad. If you're
Yep.
listening, I'm
That's
showing you
it.
a picture.
Well, I was looking it up on my cowboy encyclopedia. See
The
there?
Cheyenne Club?
Yeah, but it's not on here. It's not in
Oh.
here.
But it said, I mean, for people to, I said, there was this fancy club called the Cheyenne Club, but I don't know if you
Yeah.
realize it said here, someone described the Cheyenne Club where it said, Sir Horace Plunkett, son of Lord Dunsany, who ran the EK Ranch, could be found playing on the club tennis courts while yelling chess moves to his two opponents on the piazza. In the meantime, Henry Ulrich's $4,000 16 passenger drag, which is like a fancy um, carriage. Um,
Okay.
the only rig so fancy anywhere west of the Mississippi might be waiting at one of the club's 19 hitching posts. And then it
That
said,
must be where Ulrich, South Dakota comes from.
yeah, I bet. I don't know. That Ulrich name sounded familiar to me too. I can't
Yeah,
remember.
it's a town in South Dakota.
But then they would dress for dinner on gala evenings in white tie and tails.
Oh, hell yeah. It was an uppity, uppity son of a buck.
Right. I mean, it was crazy stuff. It said one of the guys complained they would order all these fancy food, caviar and stuff out from out east. Um, and one of the guys wrote a note, the cigars are too dark. Send the lightest possible 500 Lazo Vittoria. And the Garvey sherry lacked almost entirely fine bouquet. If you cannot send us the Garvey sherry in good quality, omit that item. Sound like a bunch of ranchers to you out there in
And then over 100 years later, a guy by the name of Shad Sullivan goes to college in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And there's a place downtown that doesn't look anything like that called the Cheyenne Club. And back in those days, we could still drink when we were 19 years old, and I had to wait till midnight to turn 19 so I could drink
yeah,
at
how'd
the
the rest
Cheyenne Club.
all right, so how'd the rest that night go?
I don't remember.
That's yeah. I've been. I'm waiting for the good part of that story. You started drinking it in the midnight,
I
and
remember
then
being turning eight. I was 18 years old, going to college up there. I was going to turn 19. I think that was like the last year. You had to be 21 after that. And I can remember all my friends. They were older than me, and they put me out there in the pickup, and they said, "We'll come get you at midnight." And they did. They come and got me at midnight. And I mean, that guy wouldn't let me into that bar till that clock struck midnight. And on my 19th birthday, I had a few beers.
you were in a hurry to get in there.
It was fun. I mean, Cheyenne, the culture of the West is there. I loved Cheyenne. I loved going to school up there. But yeah, I mean, what you're reading to me is just, it's exactly the way it's happening today. It's
Yeah,
weird.
right. And but really, to think about Cheyenne, I mean, to go through there, it was like one of the richest at this time in the 1880s when they all came over and invested all this money. They would have their ranches, and then this Cheyenne Club was where they would stay when they would come into town. So it
The
actually had a
reason it
bunch of
was, the reason it was is because of the railroad, right?
yeah, yeah.
That's
And it
exactly what.
actually had a bunch of bedrooms. It was almost like a hotel. So at the bottom was all this, billiard room and cigar room and all this reading
Clubs.
room, and then the top was there where they could stay. These like
Yeah.
aristocrats.
Yeah. And
Um,
and what's funny about this whole story is my third great grandfather, a guy by the name of Fred Philip Sullivan, uh, drove the Cheyenne Deadwood stage from 1878 to 1882.
yeah.
And yeah, after he got done, he settled in Lusk, Wyoming, became the I think it's Natrona County sheriff there. Um,
He
but no
probably knew
doubt
some of them guys.
he probably did know some of them. I mean, he was good friends with Wild Bill and Calamity Jane. I mean, you can Google the guy. He's on Google.
What was the name?
But
What
uh,
was the name?
is it Fred Philip Sullivan?
Yeah. Didn't you find him in a museum or something?
Yeah, I found his Stetson hat and his um, what is that called? His stagecoach
Yeah. So the
in the
stagecoach is
museum in Les, Wyoming. Yeah,
in the
it's
less.
cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
Hmm. So you know that he hauled some of those people back and forth,
Yeah. Well,
across the
Deadwood,
ground.
Cheyenne. I'm thinking about Deadwood was pretty rough. I don't know how many aristocrats were up there, but
Oh, they were up
yeah,
there
I
looking for
suppose
gold.
it. Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And so that is what led to the Johnson County War, which we got into on the last episode, kind of telling how the whole thing went down.
Yep.
But we skipped over, and what you brought up that I hadn't talked about was Cattle Kate. The whole
Yeah.
Johnson County War kind of started with Cattle Kate.
Hmm.
Did you
Yeah.
want to talk about Cattle Kate?
Well, I think that the more you read about Cattle Kate, the more you figure out that she was probably innocent of the charges. But her and her husband were hanged, accused of stealing, of rustling cattle from a neighbor. And the odd thing about it is the neighbor and his five lynchmen hanged him. Never, nothing ever happened to him, and he ended up with their two homesteads. So
Yeah.
her life, from what I read, her life was, man, it was wild. She died at 29 years old, right? And I'm like, how did she live so many places and go so many? I mean, she's a very talented woman, obviously, but she'd been accused of a lot of things, including being a hooker or a woman of the night, whatever. And then she got married to this gentleman, and they never did tell that they were married because they wanted to claim that other homestead,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Because
what
she
it
had to
came
be
down.
single. Yeah, that's what it came down to. And then, of course, the fight was over water, and that was what kind of started it. And then all of a sudden, she's being accused of. But I think
Well,
the whole. Go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, I
No,
was
go ahead.
her name was Ella Watson.
Ella
And
Watson.
that's
That's right.
what, and I never really saw a good explanation of why because there was another cattle Kate that they maybe confused her with or something. But the whole thing kind of turned into, these Wyoming stock grower, that group, they kind of ran the press and they turned it in. That's why she was accused of being a prostitute and all these other things. It was kind
Yeah,
of
they went straight to the press.
like and the reports were like dime novel type, sensationalized, crazy. But what it was, I guess, it said on the afternoon of July 20th, 1889, six armed men on horseback rode up to the two properties owned by a storekeeper named Jim Averill and his wife, Ella Watson. So if you're thinking, well, why don't they have the same last name? In Wyoming at that time to homestead, you could get 160 acres per person or per
Right.
family, probably. So they were married, but they weren't. I don't know if it was even legal or whatever. But
Yeah.
they wanted their each had to have 160 acres because Ella Watson, who also known as Cattle Kate, was a cowgirl. I mean, she ran it herself. The way everything gets described, she was a very rough gal. I suppose they would say back then. Um, but yeah, they drug them out of their place and pretty much just took them out and hung them. The crazy, it all goes back to it's straight out of a movie because what I read, they were hanging them. They had them up on a rock and they were going to kick them off this rock. And
Right.
when one of their neighbors or one of their friends heard about it, and he comes riding out and starts shooting his gun at the people that are going to hang him, and he hit one of the guys in the hip. But the noose was already around their necks, so the guys and they were going to tie their hands and stuff, but they just kicked them off the rock as soon as that guy came in shooting, and then they both died.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah, and one of the guys, local rancher Albert John Bothwell, they were members of the executive. Actually, five of the six guys were members of the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, and two, including the local rancher Albert John Bothwell, were members of its executive committee, responsible for overseeing the policing of the open range. Meaning, and that guy was a neighboring ranch. He wanted their place. he came down and killed him, murdered him. But then there was also some witnesses. It said within, this is from that book I showed last time, Cattle Kingdom, Hidden
Yeah.
History of the Cowboy West. But it said within a few weeks, the primary eyewitness to the lynching, Averill's visiting friend Frank Buchanan, who I think is the guy who came down and was shooting. He was shooting at him. So he saw him get hung. He disappeared. Rumors
Yes.
persisted that he had been whisked abroad to Great Britain where he lived comfortably, but it is
He
far
was
more like,
murdered.
yeah, it is far more likely that he was assassinated or dry gulched, as the local describes it. Soon after, another witness to the abduction, an 11-year-old Gene Crowder, also went missing, and then a 22-year-old nephew of Averill, Ralph Cole, at work at his uncle's store at the time of the lynching occurred, was poisoned to death, perhaps warning
Jesus.
to others who might want to testify against both Bothwell and his fellow cattlemen. So,
My gosh.
Wyoming stock growers, they come in, hung two people, and murdered, more than likely murdered three of their family members who were not happy about the deal and might make trouble for them later. And
And
so
did you know
that,
that Wyoming today, Wyoming is the only state still legal to hang rustlers in?
I didn't know that. But yeah, to go back, the same quote I read from last week, which goes kind of right along with everything we're dealing with. The revival of the old spirit of intolerance in the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, an un-American spirit of dominance which would ride roughshod over the weaker elements and force them to immigrate or crawl, cowed and subdued at the feet of fierce and implacable oligarchy. Um, yeah. So going back to NCBA, we're not getting hung and shot at and all that other stuff because we want to support independent ranchers, but we are being called animal rights activists and fake farm groups that are bought off and all that kind of stuff. They're still
Well, and I will tell you this, Judy, there's a lady up in northern Wyoming who's or central eastern Wyoming, I'm sorry, that is a rancher, Judy McCullough, and she will tell you a lot of these stories, and there is a difference. I mean, she's been trying to get she supports independent production, and she's been trying to get articles in the an ag uh, an ag journal up there that supports independent production, and she cannot get it done. And so these things are not, you know, there's nothing new under the sun, but you would think 2025 it'd be a little different. Here's a really good dictionary of the American West. It's a good book too. It's got a lot of information about these things.
yeah,
But we do have a really cool history in the West, and I
right.
love. I even love that, but I just you always hear about history repeating itself, and so here we are living in those days,
Well, maybe it
and
never like really stopped. I mean, because you think about like how did we get here? And it's always kind of like people talk about cliques and things like that and being part of the cool kids club, but I mean back then it was like you had this club of these fancy ranchers that everyone, it seemed like back then probably everybody around Cheyenne wanted to be included in part of the club, and they had all the
yeah,
money, so they kind of controlled everything. And then the further you got out of town, the less they controlled, but they tried to push that out. I mean, yeah, there's so many similarities kind of as far as what's going on today.
yeah, I totally agree. And it is, what was that show we were talking about on the last episode of Lonesome Report?
Open
Um,
Range, the movie?
Open.
Yeah.
I can only imagine because these ranges really were open, and the thought of barbed wire. You can read the books about the XIT ranch and the Panhandle and what the barbed wire caused among the open range people and the rustlers, and it gets pretty dadgum wild really fast. And you were talking about just a while ago the Cudahy family, a big conglomerate, Swift, the precursor to Swift.
Mhm.
And the Cudahy family came to Crowley County, Colorado, and it was all open range around 1890, still open range. And they built a self sustaining farm and ranch in Crowley County, Colorado, um, right before Homestead Days. The Homestead Act opened that land up, and I mean, you talk about a footprint. I mean, it had its own school, its own generator, artesian wells, barns. They milked 1,000 cows. They had 70,000 turkeys. They farmed, but they were expecting there to be water and rain consistently in Crowley County, and there's not. They even built a dam. 100. It's a mile long and it's 100 feet wide. They brought in rocks by the wagons full. It was a state of the art facility. I've written some stuff on it and done some reporting on it, but it only lasted 16 years.
Yeah.
And then, the barbed wire, because it was open range, these people laid their claim, and it was over.
Yeah.
So
Is
pretty
any of
cool.
it left? Like, is there
Yeah,
anything left there?
yeah. There's 2 silos left, and then these silos were cement, and they are beautiful out there on the prairie, just sticking up in the middle of nowhere. And then the mule barn was designed where the mules could go up, and they took hay up into the top, and you could turn the wagon around on a ramp and come back down, and then they housed the mules under the loft, and that the foundation, they just took the foundations of that down, but the ramp is still there, and it was
Hmm.
massive. I mean, when my mom was a kid, she told about the mansion that was across the road, and we always heard stories that there was a tunnel that went from the mansion to the bunkhouse, and the bunkhouse would hold 60 people. And then there was managers' houses and a blacksmith shop. I remember the blacksmith shop as a young kid was still there. It's not there any longer. But what a freaking awesome history. But it was just financially unviable, right?
So the
Because of,
Cudahy, were they just a big money family?
yeah, they were packers. They were
So they
it
were
was
already beef packers before they started that
yeah,
ranch.
yep. Bar S Bacon is part of that. Was
Hmm.
part of that. And the old story goes, my mom used to tell me that when, that ranch was abandoned, but those back in those days, people didn't tear stuff up. And she said they'd go into that old house. And she said there was a piano, which that piano now sits in the Crowley County Heritage Museum. And she said on the mantle above the fireplace was the brand Bar S. And I don't
Oh,
know whoever
really?
got that mantle. Yeah, but then she
Hmm.
said lightning hit the house back in the 60s and burned it down.
Hmm.
But just a tremendous, tremendous, and I've got incredible photos of the place. And these barns were so massive, Jim, that you just the thought of it being today, you can't think about how massive they are. But the craftsmanship was so phenomenal that in one of the barns, and this was before roads, right? So this is with all in wagon days. One of the barns was probably 200 feet long, and of course 2 and 3 decks. But inside the shingles, they put Cudahy, changed the color of the shingles to spell out Cudahy. And
Yeah, it is. It's wild to think when you see, how did they have time to do what they did back then?
well, it was you just said it. Time was not like it is now. Like they knew it took time to do things. It took time to build things. That's why they could go out and get these investors from all over the world. It took time. I mean, and nobody was in a hurry to get ahead of the other guy. I mean, if you had the money, they were already ahead, so time wasn't an issue, and it's not like instantaneous today. I mean, I can remember when I was a little kid before we had cell phones and the internet. Heck, we didn't even have a computer till I was in high school. But my dad was buying these Southern Kevs because a northern market would not affect the southern. A change in the northern market wouldn't affect the southern market for 2 weeks, right? That's just the way it was back then, and very interesting times. Very, very good.
Hmm. All right. Well, tune in next week.
Yep.
Lonesomelands.com. Click subscribe. Go on there. I have a rough draft of the media kit. Advertising opportunities. Go to jim@lonesomelands.com. Email me. Um, MundorfHeritageBeef.com. RanchVision.com. All that stuff. Next week. Adios.
I'm ready for the history. Talk to me.
I am going to cut this part out because I got to go pee.